I'm here to talk about how to build the right thing, how to build the right solution for your customers, for your end users. And since we're at Agile Tour, obviously in an Agile context. My goal, however, today is to challenge some of the typical way of working with Agile. And I see that, in my experience, Agile has some challenges that we have to deal with. My name is Kjartan Nielsen Friis. I'm a Norwegian working in Oslo for Visma. I work as a development manager, responsible for approximately 90 people in 8 countries, working with HRM solutions, new cloud solutions. I'm educated as an industrial designer, which makes me a little bit different from many of my colleagues, and I have maybe a little bit of a different perspective on things. And I'm truly passionate about quality products and quality solutions that are built with some insights into who's actually going to use it at the end. And we'll just let the last guys come in here. Have a seat, guys. I did a better pitch this morning than I thought. Okay, so we're going to build great stuff. We're going to build something that works, the right thing. I presented 2 challenges this morning, so I'm going to start with using a couple of minutes on explaining those problems. So let's start with problem statement number 1. Look at this picture. Is this yellow thing that cuts the banana a good product? Depends, yeah. Yeah. Even if it was perfectly engineered, super highly low-cost production that was made in gold, I would still argue that this is the wrong product. Why? Because you own a knife. It's not solving anything. Unless you have to slice 100 bananas a day, this doesn't solve anything. It just creates another thing that you have to wash, have to store somewhere. So for 99.9999% of the population, this is the wrong product because you own a knife. So let's take a look at the Apple Watch. Is that the right product? Let's try to use the same thinking. What is it solving? What problem is it fixing? Yeah. Money? I think Apple is quite disappointed with the sales. So it's probably not hitting the target there. For some people, yes, I could argue that this is the right product. It has some cool features, training, and some of those things where it does create value for the end user. It's definitely beautifully engineered. It has a lot of cool technology in it. But for most of us who could buy one of these, we already own a smartphone, and it's not really solving anything. It's not giving me as an end user any value. Meaning for most of us, even me who have most Apple products there is to buy, I'm not buying this because it's not giving me any value. So let's consider a knife again. This is OXO. The company was founded in 1990. The founder's wife had mild arthritis, which had trouble gripping things like kitchen appliances. So he founded this company. 2 years later, it sold for $273 million. And they are still going well and strong. Not maybe the most beautiful products, not maybe the coolestly engineered or best designed, but they proved to create a true value for their end users. So, Problem number one is, in too many cases, I'm not saying always, but in too many cases, we do not solve in actual problems, or we're not creating value for our end users. Problem number one. Problem number two. You know what this is. This is a sprint. And sprints are fine. They're about going fast. And those of you who know me know that I have a slide like this that I use almost every week with my teams, and I'm talking about speed. I want them to speed up. Kind of the manager role. You have to do that. The problem is that this isn't really the sport we should be comparing ourselves with. We should be comparing us with a sport that's a lot less cool, to be honest, and it's called orienteering. Do you know this? And what's the difference between a sprint and orienteering? You have to find the direction. The sprint does not necessarily give us a direction. It's just about speed. Meaning, problem number two is we do not necessarily have a direction, means we become too short-sighted. We just want to look 1 or 2 weeks ahead. And then we refuse to have a long-term plan or a long-term vision. And the worst kind of agile is the one that have no idea what you're solving and we're moving super fast without a direction. And then you end up building something like this. And yeah, I've used Microsoft Project and it kind of works, but this is what's good example of feature-driven development. You end up just adding as many features as you can as fast as possible. And the end result is something crappy that nobody wants to use. So, that was the problem statements. Let's look at the solutions. What are the solutions? 1, you have to be able to solve an actual problems, you have to have an understanding of the end user's need. You have to know your end user. Number 2, to have a direction, you're going to have an opinion about where you plan to go. You are going to have an opinion about, oh, it says option, should have said opinion, about the future, a concept on where you're going. And these are the 2 things that I will be talking about. So let's start with the end user. I, as I said, work for Visma, and we make, amongst others, financial systems, ERP systems, HRM systems, and so on. And this could be a typically representation of one of our users, especially if it was up to marketing to make them. We don't know his name, and he has a tie and a suit, and he works in this office like that. And nobody reacts to being presented like a user to this, like this as a user. So what does this guy want? What's in our backlog? This guy wants some new tax report functionality. He wants a financial dashboard. He needs some more. He's got these big tables with numbers on them. So he needs some filtering, and he needs some more charts, not just the pie charts and the line charts or whatever. No. No, 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 no. This is not where you start. Because this isn't your user. This is my user. Her name is Tina. And this is her work context. And when one of my guys at my department took this picture, it was so busy that he couldn't even get the photo focused. And this is the person you have to get to know. And this person is quite different than the idealized picture, the staged picture in the previous slide. And when you got to know Tina, you know what her problems are. She wants to cooperate more closely with her coworkers. She worries that she's inside, that there are errors in her numbers, that there's something wrong in there. She always gets stressed out by the end of the month because there's just so much to do. And she asked the younger guys at work how the solution works, because she's not confident enough to use it. This is the starting point for understanding something about the user. It's a starting point for what will be your requirements later on. And it's the starting point of not making functionality that's not needed. So these are the things that you would like to figure out. Small exercise. I'm going to ask you these 8 questions. They may be a little bit tilted towards a business-to-business context, but if you're working on a consumer product, that's fine as well. So I'm going to read them up, and for every question that you know the answer to, you can count 1 on your finger. Do you know what functionality in the current solution that you're working on is used the most? Count 1 if you know. Who is the typical user of your system? Do you know that? Do you know how much IT competence they have? What their main task is? Do they use any other systems in parallel with the one that you're providing them with? Is there anything in that context that they're working on that they don't have an IT solution for? Do you know the work context or use context? It doesn't necessarily have to be at work in a workplace. Like if they're being interrupted, working on the go, working at home, kind of screen they have and so on. And do you know what their biggest struggle is when dealing with your system? Okay, so now you should have landed at a number. Who knows all 8? 2 guys. Congratulations, guys. Who knows 6 to 7? A few more. 4 to 5? Yeah, okay, good. 1 to 3? And then a lot of people never raise their hand, so they have no idea, and that means I'm just assuming that it's 0. Yeah, okay, this is typically how this turns out. You know the questions to some of them, and then you have an idea on something, but you're not absolutely sure. And this list couldn't have been 100 questions longer. The point is that we have to know these kind of things. And we have to know our users on 2 levels. We have to know the facts. That's the top level, the facts of what are they working on, in what context, on what computer, in what setting, with which tasks. Those are facts that can be observed. You can ask them, you can have surveys, so you can view it. It's either yes or no. And then, if you really want to understand your end user, you want to dig 1 step deeper. You want to know not just the behavioral stuff, but you want to know the attitudinal stuff. Meaning, what is the reason for this going wrong? Why is Tina worried that her numbers are wrong? It's just a fact that she is worried, but why? Why is there so much stress? Why are people afraid of doing this? Why is she not feeling confident? Why? What motivates people? What fears people? And to be able to figure that stuff out, you have to listen. I used to say you have to talk to them, but you can talk as much as you want, but you basically have to get some feedback also. And the big question is why? Why? That's the question you have to ask. There's a lot of methods that I would recommend using. These are typically the ones we're using at Visma. I'm not going to go through them in detail. There's plenty of documentation about these online, great things, videos to read up on, and examples and templates and all. But you should know that there are a vast number of methods you can use. You could use user monitoring, just like getting Google Analytics or a lot of other things to get data back. And some people have talked about that earlier today, using hardcore metrics. That's a great quantitative source for knowing some of the facts, the behavioral stuff of a user. You could do surveys, which will also, formulated in the right way, can give you good quantitative data. Then you can do observations and usability tests that would give you qualitative data, but still on the behavioral side. Only facts on what's going on. But you're out there dealing with a few people at the time. You can't do or observations of 10,000 people. That's going to take you years. The good thing about combining these kind of things, or at least observation and usability test, we always combine them with an interview afterwards, because we can ask the question, why? Why did you do that? Why did you click there? Why did you think? What did you expect to happen? What? And then you start getting a dialogue and you start understanding the second layer. So then you get some attitudinal stuff. And then you have personas that you might be familiar with to document it. A lot of people write personas without doing the other stuff, meaning they're just guessing. If you haven't done the research on your end user, it's no problem pretending and just writing a persona. You have to do the work. You know this one, the Sony Walkman. So why am I bringing up the Sony Walkman? Because it proves a point that's very important to know if you're going to use any of these methods. I said you should go out, visit the customer, you should listen to them, to the end user, but you cannot ask for what they want. You are not allowed to ask, do you want this? Or do you want that? If Sony in 1980 had gone and listened to the market research that was at that time, they would have never built the Walkman. And it's their biggest success story ever. Sold something like 80 million units or something. All the market research showed that there was no market for this, because they asked the wrong question. They asked basically, do you want it? But people weren't capable of having the insight to see if they wanted something that wasn't there yet. So your job when you're trying to go out and figure out what your end users need is not to ask them what they want, but it's to figure out what their motivation are, why are things happening, and then you're going to use that insight with your technology insights and come up with a solution. So people are unable to state their needs. You are very unlikely to be able to state future behavior, what you're going to do, because you don't know what options you have. So do not ask your users what they want, at least before you have it. You can test it if you have a prototype and see if it works. But if you haven't built it yet, you're not asking them. Okay, everybody can contribute in doing user research. How many of you have UX designers as colleagues, or somebody working with user insight? Yeah, some of you. In many cases, UX department could be in the lead for this. It depends a little bit on what kind of background they have. But in many schools, UX designers have training in these methodologies that I mentioned and a user-centered design process. And I would like to clarify something, the big misunderstanding among a lot of people regarding the role of UX. And I'm going to start with this. Do you know what this is? Yeah, it's a juice. It's a juice presser, designed by the very French designer Philippe Stork. And it's a huge success. So it's easy to argue that it was the right product, because it sold millions as well and made Alessi, the company, a great deal of money. However, it doesn't work. You don't get any juice out of it. Or at least just a tiny bit, and then it tips over. And the worst thing is, if you get lemon on it or citrus fruit, it corrodes. So why the hell do people buy this? It's a fashion, it's a statement, it's a status symbol. It's something that's cool to have in your kitchen. It's a trend. It's basically similar to a little bit of a piece of art. Something to put on the shelf. Yeah, maybe. Like a lot of watches, most watches, why would people buy super expensive watches if the only function was to show the time? Then you would buy the cheapest watch there is and it would work for years. And people buy these super expensive mechanical watches. It's a fashion, it's a trend. So why am I talking about this regarding the UX? Well, that Philip Stark in this case deals with art, with aesthetics, and that's pretty much it. The UX guys and girls that you work with or are here, your job is not, or their job is not primarily aesthetics. Yes, they can help with that, but that's just in the very last part of your process. Their main job is to figure out the user needs and try to have an opinion about what will create a good user experience. And a good user experience is not aesthetics alone. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So we're not in the arts business. We're about creating valuable solutions for our users, and that's far more than this. So that was just a clarification. Since this is an Agile tour, I have to talk about the user story. And have you thought about a user story? What is it built off of? As a type of user, I want some feature thingy so that I can achieve some reason. What happens if you haven't done any user research? You have no idea who your type of user is, you just guess, and you have no idea why they should want something. So you're left with 1 out of 3 blanks, and then you just guess the rest. This is one of the bases of Agile. And if you don't know your end user, you're not able to write a good user story. End of story. You're guessing. You're taking a gut feeling and just saying, yeah, that's some people in sales told me that our users really want that. No, that's not good enough. I don't trust sales. Okay. Second thing, have a concept about the future. The problem here is a little bit, it came up earlier today also. In Agile, we're not supposed to have a plan, and therefore we're not, let's not bother to think longer than 1 sprint ahead. Well, doesn't really work that well. Okay, XC90. Won one of those, by the way. What's the difference between these two? Yeah, that's the production version, and that's the concept car. Now, the car industry isn't really, it's quite a conservative industry. But still, they are the industry that they, on a regular basis, are able to pull out some sort of prototype and say that that's where we're going. That's what we believe in. It's going to have 350 horsepower, and it's going to be electric, and it's going to have this cool dashboard, and it's going to look like that. It's going to be produced by this super cool new material. So they're exposing their strategy, their product strategy, and saying that's where we're going. And I find that very interesting. All of us know that, okay, the concept car is not really what's going to be in the production at the end, but there are definitely similarities. They didn't just throw that picture away and then went build something completely different. They got inspired from this. And this is how a concept should work. It should have an opinion about the future. This is one of my favorite concepts that I've been part of working with a little bit. Any idea what it is? It's something called welfare technology. And this we did in Visma. The concept is called live longer at home. Clear problem statement. We wanted to help elderly people live longer at home. It would save and not go to nursing homes. It would have saved and will save the public millions and millions and millions of reduced costs of healthcare and nursing homes. It will keep elderly people more happy because they want to live at home. They don't want to go to a nursing home. The problem is that for some reason you get fragile, you get sick, and you can't live at home anymore alone. Technology can help. We believe that with sensors, with kind of Internet of thinking, and some software application that's not super complex to build, we can provide the public with a very good welfare technology program. And we've piloted some of this in some municipalities in Norway. The interesting thing, if you look at this picture, is how we displayed the concept, our opinion of the future. We basically built an apartment and made it look like an old woman looked there. The lady here, she's a hired actor. And this is during our presentations to some of the top politicians in Norway, where we acted out how we would believed this woman, I can't remember what we called her, would live in this apartment and how she would go about dealing with her everyday life and using some of these sensors and applications that we'd provided. But as you see, we've tried to focus on the value, the problem that we wanted to solve, and not the technology. The technology is completely hidden. And it says something about where we want to go in the future. So, be bold. You should have an opinion about the future. You're not allowed to just say, next sprint. And that's what all we care about. You have to be able to have two thoughts at the head at the same time. Next sprint, yes. Are we going in that direction? Yes. And why is it that you should have the opinion about the future? Well, that's because you have the technology insight, and based on my first half now, you're also going to have the user insight. And those two things will help you build a concept that's more likely to succeed. We're never guaranteed anything. But if you build a concept based on only technology insight, or only a trend in the market, you're more likely to fail. The more data or more insights you can put into a concept, the higher probability it is that that will succeed once it's launched. So combining the technology insights and the end user insight is what is the basis for a good concept. And you should have an opinion about that. And I would like you to express that opinion through a concept. Now, you've seen a couple of versions. The way you want to document this could be a million different ways. It could be through a prototype like the Volvo, or it could be through an apartment like the other picture, or it could be by some text or wireframes and some conceptual sketches of the architecture and some solution outline. It's basically up to you. But there should be some parts that should be part of your concept. First of all, the objective. The objective of the concept is to kind of give direction of your team, of your company. So it kind of says, this is the way we're going, and these are the solutions that we're going to, or this is the value that we want to create, or the problems that we want to solve. So then we can leave everything else. That might also be interesting, but let's focus on this. So it gives us more focus. It should challenge us. It shouldn't be easy. But it should also inspire us and say that, oh, that's something I'd really like to see and be able to build. I have no idea how we're going to build it, but yeah, super cool. And then it has to set some constraints. Those could be technology constraints. It could be market constraints. It could be what users to target. And it could be a lot of other constraints. And when working with concepts, creativity is typically a topic that comes up. And Just to clarify something about creativity. Creativity works best under constraints. It's not just you can do whatever you want. Well, then I'm not going to do anything. If you're limited, you have to think in a new way. If you have to build that website into a just smaller screen, you have to, okay, how can we do this differently? And then creativity starts flowing. So it should give some constraints. Your concept should contain a user, who the user is, and it should say something about the problems that you're going to solve, or the need, or the value that you're going to add. So then we have that kind of ticked off. And then you could have kind of a solution outline. This isn't necessarily a plan that Agile kind of warns us about, because it's not a detailed plan on how you're going to get there. It's just a guiding star or on where you want to go. And it's not any detailed design, whether technical or functionally, on how the solution should work, but rather what it is that you want to achieve and how you believe the outline of the solution could be like. How are you going to use this in an Agile context? Well, this you know, in a lot of different versions, and I'm going to take my red teacher's pen out and correct this a little bit. Obviously, you know that this is where you build or develop something, but you're going to have to do some research before you have a product backlog. That product backlog there is based on end user research. It could be based on technology research, proofs of concepts, market research, and a lot of other research, but for my purposes today, end user insight before you have that product backlog. So you have to do that first, and then you're going to do some design work, and then we're going to build something, and then we're going to test it. And this is basically the same principle as lean startup that was talked about earlier today, but we're missing one thing, and what's that? That's the arrow back there. And the goal with Agile is trying to put things in the context so that the time from there until there is as short as possible. But you have to get that feedback. And you apply different methodologies on where you are here from end users. Just like you do different kinds of testing from a technical perspective at different stages, you would do different kind of user interaction at different stages here. But then there's one thing missing, and that was the whole concept thing. Where does that fit into this picture? Well, that's basically your guiding star. That's your North Star. So every once in a while, you look up from your sprint and you see, are we headed in the right direction? Or are we just spending time on not getting anywhere? Spending time either is something that's very detailed and doesn't really create that much value, spending time on something that takes us in a different direction that we really wanted to go. So you basically look up and you adjust. But the concept is not a static thing. It's not a fixed version. It's a living document that you maintain. And gradually, when your solution evolves and becomes more mature, and you talk to more and more users, and you gain more and more insight, you're going to adjust your concept as well. So you should have a concept that's always 1 to 3 to 5 years ahead of you. And it's a moving target that you're actually never going to reach. But you always have some direction where you want to go. And sometimes it's impossible to have kind of a 5-year plan, but maybe it's enough to have, okay, within 8 months, we should be able to get there. And you have to have kind of a short-term plan. Or not necessarily a plan, but a concept on where you want to go. So that is kind of evolving as your solution is evolving and as you're maturing and knowing the domain that you're working on. You kind of look up and see, okay, are we headed in the right direction? So, to finalize a little bit, to summary, the right product is something that has value for the end user. Or you could be very strict and say that it could have value for the company that you're working for as well. You could build something that would save your company a lot of costs and then would have value for that. But let's, for the sake of simplifying a little bit, value for the end user. or fixing a problem for the end user. So the questions that should be part of your everyday work in your wherever you're working is, what problem is it that we're trying to solve? What value are we providing? And if you're not able to answer those, you have to have a serious discussion about how you do your requirements and how your user stories are written and how you gain the insights on what you believe that you should be developing. These are fundamental questions that everybody in the organization should be able to answer. I'm not saying that we're doing it right all the time, but at least we're trying as good as we can. The way to know the answer of these questions is to gain end-user insight, and is to maintain sort of a concept, maintain a continuous opinion about the future. What's your contribution to some sort of future scenario? And that's my challenge to you guys. Thank you.
Time for questions.
I have a very simple one. Thanks for a good presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
You said we should not ask what client wants.
Yeah.
So how to phrase the right question then?
The problem, the client, if there's a client you're talking about, the client is going to tell you what he needs. So let's do a... there's a difference between a customer and a user. The customer is the one paying for something. And you might have a contractual obligation to deliver on something that they've specified up front. The user, however, at least in a business-to-business setting, doesn't really isn't really being asked. So your question was how do you get depends on your situation. And in the situation where I'm working, we're basically making an opinion about what we believe the users will need in the future, long before they've actually stated that need. But we believe that we have enough technology, market, and user insight to form an opinion. So we have a fairly, we know where we're going, and we're not guaranteeing that it's a success. But then I'm not working on a contract for any external parties either. I found this much more difficult when working on a governmental contract where somebody had specified all the functions up front. That makes this approach a lot more difficult, and I found that far more difficult. So somebody also talked about the different levels of governmental contracts, having agile versions of that. I think that's a very good idea, because that will leave you with the flexibility to find out what's needed to build later on.